Cool. Right, let's get straight into it then, because we've got one beast of an album to talk about. Told you the Black, Brown Nosing was still coming. First of all, let's get clear on the title, because it looks like the Foul Deth of Engelond.
Yeah.
But it also looks like it could be pronounced Engelond, on all sorts of things that people in the modern age are a bit too silly to look up the, well, not silly, but lazy to look up the pronunciation of, myself included.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so you're absolutely correct. It is it's Foul Deth of Engelond. But it's written in Middle Scottish.
Okay.
So it actually derives from just after the Black Death came to these shores, and the Scots at the time believed that it was the wrath of God, specifically raining down to kill off the English. And then obviously, a few months later down the line, the plague arrived in Scotland. Yeah. And I think, they swiftly realised that it wasn't exclusively affecting the English. But yeah, at the time they thought it was. So it was, they termed it the Foul Deth of Engelond. And I suppose it's up for interpretation, really, as to what it means in the context of this album. It could mean it could still refer to the Black Death itself, because it played such a part in the socio-economics of the 14th century that gave rise to the revolt, which is the actual theme of the album. It could also refer to the revolt itself, I suppose. Or it could, and this is my personal take, refer to the corruption and malice and ineptitude and all the horrible things about the ruling figures at the time. That's a long answer, but it's Middle Scottish for, as you guessed it, Foul Deth of Engelond.
Yeah, good. Long answers are good, mate. I'm happy. Nobody wants to listen to me talk.
I don't know about that.
Oh, you. Well, as you've mentioned there, the socio-economic environment of the time, and this album, at least according to the press release, is inspired by the 1381 Peasants Revolt. What is it about that revolt in particular that you drew inspiration from for this album?
I suppose it's, despite being 700 years in the past, I was seeing so many things that were still very much inherent in modern day society, in terms of the I don't know, I suppose the what's the word? Like, I suppose the political situation and the social order, the living conditions. Just, there's so many similarities between then and where we find ourselves now. Despite there being such a huge amount of time between 1381 and the present day. So I suppose that's what attracted me to it.
Good. I think it's interesting as well. It's definitely unique to countries like Britain, or maybe probably other countries as well, like Spain or anywhere else with like a royal family, in that we historically always had these people where there is a certain class that genuinely believe they're born to rule. And
exactly.
So, it can be a little hard explaining that to people from other countries. When you explain, they go, oh, well, so many presidents, for example, were lawyers, or, so many of our prime ministers went to the same school.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it just feels like that's, it never seems to change. If anything, it gets worse. And the social hierarchy and that conservative ideology just seems to just get worse over time. when you'd expect it, to to hopefully improve.
Yeah, I'm
But
sure they were saying that in 1381 and
yeah,
during the days of Peterloo and all the other examples of elite arrogance that this
yeah,
country with.
exactly. Yeah, they were probably
Yeah.
looking in the history books at 700 something and thinking, when's it all going to change? But yeah, certainly not anytime soon. It feels like.
No, no. Now, this is where I get really interested with Sacred Son
Uh-huh.
because it's the music itself is great. It's really good black metal music.
Thank you.
But when you listen to the messages and the ideals behind it, it's both rare and refreshing to find a more left-wing stance in black metal, especially as a left-winger. You know, I'm sure you wouldn't be shocked looking at me and gear and that, going, "Oh yeah, he voted for Corbyn. Of course he did."
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So for you, is there any kind of not apprehension, but a feeling of being an outsider or anything like that in this genre, which has been not that dominated, but rife with nationalism and sort of pagan beliefs and things like this?
Um, I suppose not so much now. It feels like black metal is becoming a much broader church, and especially going towards the left. Yeah, it feels like there's just so many bands who adhere to a more sensible political ideology than what black metal is unfortunately inherently famous for.
Yeah.
So yeah, I suppose if I were to be writing this music, a decade or so ago, then maybe there'd be part of me that would feel almost worried that I might be tarred with that same brush as the NSBM bands that are still unfortunately quite common even now. But yeah, I feel like it's becoming, with every day, I think it is becoming, like I say, a broader church and a more welcoming space for everyone, and hopefully not not Nazis and not those types of bands that we would prefer to avoid. But so yeah, I feel like it's in a good, it's going, it's not perfect, but it's going in a good direction, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, especially in London, I feel because London is such a broad, well, not broad, but it's got such a wide range of people as itself. That if you go to a black metal show, like for example, last week I went and saw Primordial in Islington,
Oh, nice.
and there was people there of all different nationalities, men, women, there's trans people, and it's great, because again, like 10 years ago, or whatever, they probably wouldn't have been made to feel that welcome or anything like
Yeah,
that. And it's not even that black metal fans as such have just gone, "Hey guys, it's okay now." It's just a
exactly.
case of we've evolved intellectually, I think.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, like we've mentioned black metal having those problems and things like that. But you go to a black metal show in London and probably in Manchester and Liverpool and cities like that as well, you will see a diverse range of people there.
Yeah, and I think that extends to all metal, really. I mean, I've been to like yourself a few shows recently, or not even recently, but I guess over the past number of years, and it is noticeable that the demographic is much more diverse now, which is great. It used to be that if I went to a metal show in, like, I don't know, the early 2000s or whatever, it would all just be white dudes. But now you can definitely tell it's a much more welcoming environment, which is great. Hopefully it'll continue to go that way, and I'm sure it will.
Absolutely, I hope so too. But let's get talking about Sacred Son again, because it's worth talking about.
I'm glad you think so.
No, absolutely. And you know, you listen. Well, the first things you'll notice about this album, well, not necessarily you, but listeners, is that once again, Sacred Sun is a full band setup, whereas the previous release was just yourself again. I think that was more of an ambient release, if I remember rightly.
Yes, Lavanya was. Yeah.
Yeah. So why the decision now to once again put it as a full unit?
I mean, it was a weird one. So Lavanya, although it was released under Sacred Sun, I suppose it could have been released under a different project name or even my own name, and which might have, in hindsight, been the better option. But it was still ostensibly a Sacred Sun album. It only really came about because, so I don't know if you've listened to the previous proper Sacred Sun record, Arthurian Catacombs, but I dabbled quite a bit with synths and creating these more ambient tracks.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I just really enjoyed the process. And we were driving up to a gig one time, and Stuart, the guitarist, said that his favorite track off that album was the last track, Ossuary 3, which is one of those ambient tracks, and sort of suggested that I, you know, give it a proper go and see if I can make a full album, just instrumental and using synths, which is how that album came about. And because it was during sort of the height of lockdown, and you know, we weren't able to really create music together because of, you know, lockdown, and, you know, practice studios all been closed. That just felt like the right opportunity to experiment with that. So that's how that came about. And then shortly after that, I started work on Foul Deth of Engelond, which was obviously more of a, you know, like you say, back to being a full band production.
Yeah. Very good. And obviously, one of the things you'll notice first about the album itself is the artwork, which is really, really striking. And I know you've had a few times before where people have made a big deal about the artwork, but this one is, I was going to say gorgeous, but that's not the right word. It's a really great piece of art.
Yeah,
and it fits with the music really, really well, and especially the themes and the historical aspects of it as well. This painting, was this a previously done painting, or was this done for the album?
No, so it was commissioned. It was an artist called Mitchell Nolt, who he's worked on with a few bands, and his work is just consistently awesome. Like, I've been following his work for a while. He did the Woad album, Servants of the Countercosmos, and he did, I think he's done all the Werewolves album covers too, amongst many others. And he just has a really unique style that just, as soon as I was envisioning the artwork for this album, my mind went instantly to him. And luckily he was free, and I explained the project to him, and he was really into the idea. And yeah, it just didn't take him very long at all to capture what I had imagined. I didn't need to send him a super detailed brief. I kind of laid out the concept of the album, and not told him about Peasants Revolt, but kind of led him in that direction so he could do his own research.
Yeah.
And yeah, the piece, I agree. The piece is, it's beautiful but brutal, and that's kind of what I was after. And it really, I think it captures the atmosphere, I think, or how I would imagine the atmosphere of that particular chapter in history, so succinctly. And it's just chaotic and so much going on. It's a pinnacle point of the revolt when the Archbishop was executed. So yeah, I agree. It's a really good piece, and I'm so pleased that I managed to get him on board for the album.
Absolutely. And what I really like about it is that it's one of those where I really didn't know if it was like commissioned for the album or if it was from hundreds of years ago.
Oh,
Because
that's good.
it could well have been the sort of painting that you'd see in the museum. Here's 1381 Peasants Revolt depicted this, that, and the other artist, so and so.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it works so well with the themes and the outlook of the album. As for recording the album itself, were there any sort of challenges to this with like lockdown restrictions or anything like that? Or by the time you'd got around to this, was it more or less things had eased down and you were able to get on with it?
No, so it was written in summer 2020. So I guess sort of in between lockdowns, I guess. But no, the writing process was more or less the same as how we wrote Arthurian, i.e., I would demo the songs at home, and then once I'd kind of finished writing the album and it was in a what I considered to be a finished state, or as finished as you can kind of get with these types of things, I sent it around to the guys along with the stems so that they could isolate out their individual parts and then just sort of learn the tracks and embellish the tracks with their own ideas and whatever else they wanted to bring to the table. And I suppose that process was kind of different to how we would have done it previously, in that we didn't have the option to, as I said before, to go to the practice room because they were all closed at this point in time. So yeah, it did involve quite a bit of online back and forthing, which I actually kind of enjoyed and would probably take that into future recordings, regardless of, COVID being hopefully over by this time. I was actually watching your interview with Toby Driver that you did a few months ago, and he was saying that he wrote Mossgrew on the plows and swords alike, plowshares and swords alike. When he was writing that album, it was a very similar process, I think. So yeah, it was really quite. It was challenging to begin with because it was a whole new method of working, but it was quite enriching. And then when it came to the recording itself, it was more or less business as usual. The recording studio was open that we wanted to use was open for business by that point. It was obviously all COVID restrictions like face masks and not being too many people in the space at the same time. But other than that, it was more or less business as usual. So a bit different, but the bits that were different, I see as positives on hindsight. Yeah.
Absolutely. Good. And the album is kind of led by the song Le Blacketh, which was released initially as a single. I think there's a visualizer video now, and I think there's also a official music video coming for it as well. I'm not too sure when that drops though. It'll probably already be out by the time I pull my finger out and post it.
Maybe it's kind of up in the air at the minute. We're just we're still trying to figure out a couple of things, but hopefully in a not too distant future, certainly before the album comes out in May, I would hope.
Cool. And what is it about this song that you feel was the appropriate advert, for lack of a better word, for the album?
Well, I guess I know I was going to say it's my personal favorite track off the album, but that kind of changes every day. I guess at the point in time when I was deciding which track to lead with, that was the one I was most kind of happy with, I suppose. And it also captures the revolt at a very significant moment. So it kind of portrays the point where I suppose the revolt has just begun, and yeah, the rebels are kind of making their way to London and freeing political captives as they go. And John Ball, the preacher, is delivering all of his sermons, and they eventually arrive into London. And yeah, they managed to get to break in over the Tower of London. And obviously, they tried. King Richard and his nobles tried to keep them out, and they eventually broke in. And they eventually had a meeting with King Richard and thought they were making progress on their demands that they were making, which were relatively quite understandable and not even that extreme. And it all kind of fell to shit. So yeah, so they kind of the rebels went on a bit of a rampage through London and burned buildings down, and executed a lot of nobles. And like as I said before, the Archbishop Simon Sudbury, who was seen as an architect of of one of the poll taxes that had been instrumental in starting the whole revolution in the first place. So it was just a very chaotic time. It kind of almost reached its crescendo by this point, and that's what the track is about. So it felt like it was a good song to lead with and try and encapsulate what the album is about.
Absolutely, yeah, it does its job really well. I'll tell you what, you would have thought they would have learned their lesson about poll tax by now, wouldn't they? But no, every so often comes back.
I know. As recently as was it 1990, late 80s. Yeah, exactly. They keep trying. They leave it a few centuries and then they try it again, and it's and then the same thing happens.
Yeah. Oh dear! Except they never finish the job.
No, not yet. Anyway.
No. Just finally, then, going forward, once this album is released, what's the plans? Do you have live shows booked? Will you be appearing at festivals, things like this?
Not as yet. No, we did. Our last show was last month. We supported Wie Gedouwd. I think that's how you pronounce it. Yeah, we supported them in their London stop off, which was great. We don't have anything lined up currently. It's kind of proving logistically difficult. Like one of our members has just left London, and another member is going to be away for work. So ideally, it would have been nice to have a launch gig, booked in for somewhere in May. But yeah, hopefully further down the line, we'll have some more shows booked in. I'm sort of considering, seeing what booking agents are out there and see if, we can get a little bit of help on that front. Mostly because I'm quite lazy when it comes to that stuff, and I'll very much wait for offers to come in rather than actively seek shows, which is something I'm trying to work on, especially now that live music has become a thing again. Hopefully that will endure, and there won't be any more pesky lockdowns coming up anytime soon. So yeah, nothing lined up at the moment, but hoping to change that soon.
Well, I hope so, because like I say, I'd love to be able to experience this music live. So
yeah, it's good fun. It's good. Yeah, it's nice when you've just finished a new album. It's nice to have new material to play live. It feels a bit more fresher, and you're not going over the same stuff, on repeat. So yeah, it's good. It's good and exciting for us to get out there and play these shows.
Good stuff. Well, Dane, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me today, mate. I really do appreciate it. And it's been very interesting to discuss these topics, and because it's things I don't really get to talk about in interviews that often.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Yeah, thank you very much for having me on, Ollie. Really appreciate it.
No problem, mate. I'll give you a shout as soon as it goes up.
Super, sounds good. Thank you very much.
Bye now.